Hey, everybody, welcome back to your Free to Go. I know it's your favorite podcast because you keep tuning in week after week after week, and we love that. Um, Before I bring Marc on screen today, I'm going to take a moment of personal privilege. I'm actually going to take a page from the past or from my past, or a page from my past. I'm very lucky to have a great group of friends from Tulane. I had an incredible experience at Tulane, and very, very fortunate. I have a group, my OG Tulane group, and there's a bunch of us in it, and we talk all the time. And I just want to thank them for always being such good friends and supporting. But in particular, one of my friends in that OG Tulane group, who's from Atlanta, who has not only had the most impressive career and family life of all of us, but she's also the biggest fan of your Free to Go. I think she could be our president of our fan club if we had one. So if you're out there listening, or anyone in my Tulane OG group listening, if you want to start a fan club for YFTG, you're free to go. You've got our permission. Marc and I would be honored. But anyway, shout out to my good friend who's our biggest fan, and she sends me lots of good comments and thoughts and critiques of our episodes, which Marc and I, we take the advice and we build on it so that we can bring you an even better episode each week. So with no further ado, I'm going to bring Marc on screen, who's out in LA. Marc, how's everything going for you today?
Everything's great. So I guess after this, I'm going to go out and print some T-shirts. Is that what we're going to do?
That's right. We'll have
Or
t-shirts.
mugs?
Yeah, we'll do.
T-shirts. Wait, actually, don't we have mugs?
We do have mugs. We have mugs.
Okay.
But we got to do a whole swag bag. It's time.
Yeah,
People are
right.
asking for it, Marc. I don't know, hats. We'll do it all.
Little hats. Well, I have a license on
Right.
one of my cars that says you're free to go.
I know.
Um,
And
yeah.
someone gave me a golf shirt that actually says "You're free to golf" with our logo on it. That was kind of cute.
Oh,
Yeah, it was.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's when we came up with the name, who knew that it would be such a easy name to kind of play with. There's a lot of applications to it. So, in fact, I was in court the other day and waiting for my case to be called, and the judge turned to the defendant and said, "You're free to go." And
Wow.
yeah, and I just laughed. I thought to myself, boy, this is so perfect. I wanted to stand up there and say, "Judge, are you listening to our podcast?"
You should have.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe I'll see him
That would have been great.
I'll see him at a bar meeting, and I'll mention it to him. Yeah. So we
So
have a
we have a great topic, right?
yes, we do a current, very hot topic. We're gonna make sure it runs this, for you guys because it's very popular right now. And where it comes out of, this idea of let's talk about we talk about our crazy ass cases, but we also, our fans like us to talk about current cases as well. So, Marc, I'm going to let you start. We're going to talk about Dr. Anthony Fauci. But you know what? Before you start, let me just give a little background. Dr. Anthony Fauci, we all know he was one of the main, voices and faces during all of COVID. Currently going through these hearings up in D.C. But I just want our viewers to know, Marc, before you take the lead on this, Dr. Fauci has 50 years of public service as a physician working for the public government and so forth. He's worked under 7 U.S. presidents, and they've been Democrats and they've been Republicans, so he's worked on both sides of the aisle. He's director of NIAID, which is the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He's the White House Coronavirus Task Force COVID-19 response team, and he was chief medical advisor to the president. So this guy, his credentials are serious, right? And now he's in the spotlight, during these hearings going on up in D.C. So, Marc, why don't you kind of get us started on the conversation? I think it's just going to be a hot one going back and forth because it's a very interesting and very divisive issue that's going on right now with Dr. Fauci.
Right. Now, let's be frank. I think during COVID, it could be easily said that he was probably one of the most important people in America.
Yeah.
He was certainly on TV almost every day. And despite the fact that he was, in many ways, a polarizing figure, because a lot of people disagreed with his advice and what he was saying, probably more people than not followed his advice and listened to him. and viewed him as the ultimate authority on the subject of COVID and COVID protection and prevention.
True.
So with that background, now we have an individual who has been called in front of a congressional committee that I believe is chaired by Senator Rand Paul,
Correct.
who is, I'm told, I believe, a physician himself. What exactly his qualifications are, I've read some things that question it, but nevertheless, he does speak with some authority on medical subjects. And according to Fauci and Fauci supporters, and this is the underpinnings of what's going on, Fauci alleges that Rand Paul is out to get him.
Right. Yeah. Let me set the stage a little more for people who may not be following the story. So, as you mentioned, there's a congressional committee. So on July 29th, Dr. Fauci appeared under a subpoena. So he was subpoenaed to appear before the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee. And that committee is chaired by Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, as you just mentioned. And I'm going to turn it back to you in a second. But why this has become such a big issue is that a lot of the questions that the committee posed to Dr. Fauci chose to plead the fifth. On the advice of counsel, he chose not to answer, but to assert his Fifth Amendment constitutional right. And that's instead of answering all these questions, he's choosing not to. And that's made this a very, very big issue. And it kind of goes from there, basically, like all the discussion on the side of he should answer and on the side that he shouldn't answer. And Senator Rand Paul, being a very aggressive advocate for the government and not a fan of Dr. Fauci's from day one, he has criticized and been a very avid, adversary of Dr. Fauci. So that's kind of setting the table as to why this is such a hot topic right now. So
right. So what's happened is this. According to reports, Fauci invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege more than 100 times during the questioning. And so he effectively did not answer any question that was posed to him by members of the committee. Now, what's interesting is that Dr. Fauci previously, and I didn't even know this, he was previously given a full pardon by President Biden for any act that he may have been involved in from the start of the whole COVID thing till, I guess, I'll give you the exact dates, from January of 2014 to January 19th of 2021.
And that I want to stop you there, Mark. That's very interesting because COVID possibly, started maybe December of 2019, right? It really people started talking about it in the States around February, March of 2020. But why in the world did this presidential pardon go so many years before COVID came to the United States?
Well, you've got to understand that theories abound, and it's been discussed since COVID became an issue for all of us, that COVID was lab produced and that would have occurred significantly before the time that it was then became a public pandemic. So I don't know the significance of the date itself, 2014, but clearly it was intended to precede the dates that COVID became a pandemic, obviously because of the allegations that are out there that it was a function of some lab experiment gone awry. The arguments have been made that it originated in the city of Wuhan and that there was a lab in Wuhan, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which we know conducted extensive work on coronaviruses and coincidentally is in the same city where the outbreak began. And there are allegations of what they called gain of function research, which is basically research on a pathogen in order to enhance its functions. Now, there has been no definitive study that absolutely proves that it was lab produced versus not. Different agencies have different intelligence. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories abound, and there are people who are very knowledgeable in the field who claim it have been produced in a lab, and that may have been information that Dr. Fauci himself had because he was involved in that whole field. I don't know what his ties were to that particular lab, but that's why I'm sure the net for the pardon was drawn so wide. Now, why is that important? Because based on the pardon, it's been argued by members of Congress that Fauci had no right to invoke a Fifth Amendment privilege because he was by pardon given full immunity for any act that he had participated in or any knowledge that he had concerning the coronavirus during that period of time.
Yeah, and
But
I think a lot of
go ahead.
people wanted answers. Just lay people, doctors around the world. I was at dinner recently with a doctor. He said, it was actually this past weekend, so it was during these, when he was pleading the fifth. He's like, as a physician, I just really want to know. So there's a lot of people around the world that want to know what happened, and then there's also, the committee trying to get to the bottom of certain things politically as well. But the optics aren't good. From a legal perspective, we understand, and we'll get into that in detail, why he pled the fifth or asserted his Fifth Amendment privilege. But the optics aren't great to answer, to assert the fifth on every question. There could have been some questions he could have answered, like, were you ever in, Wuhan? Yes. But, what did you ever misrepresent something to the public? I assert the fifth. Like, I think when you assert the fifth on everything, the optics aren't good, and maybe it should have been a little more selective. It's some things he answered and some things.
Well, there's a legal problem in selectively selecting the fifth or invoking the fifth, because the argument could be made that you waive it.
Right.
Waiver is a very important feature involved in Fifth Amendment litigation because the arguments have been made that, you can't invoke the Fifth Amendment privilege if you have effectively waived it by talking about the same subject
Yep.
in other discussions. And Fauci did make an opening statement, though his opening statement, and I've reviewed it, does not really get into any substantive matters. What it does is it attacks Rand Paul, and the committee for basically, like you used the word, politicizing this and trying to go after him for improper purposes. And that was his opening statement in essence.
Yep.
So, but the committee is arguing, and those who are seeking to censure him and hold him in contempt, they're arguing that the opening statement by itself opened the door and waived his privilege of invoking the Fifth Amendment. So what's going to happen is tomorrow morning, interestingly, Thursday, the 6th of August, at 8:30 a.m. in Eastern Time, the committee is going to vote whether or not to hold him in contempt of Congress for failing to testify. And that's going to be very interesting, and we'll follow up on that. But
Yeah.
of course, his defense is that it's not a waiver, that even though he was given immunity for all those acts during that point of time, he did testify about 250 times before Congress during the whole period of COVID and afterwards,
Yep.
where he answered questions. And he is concerned about being boxed into a situation where he may give a different answer than he gave before, and it could be used to indict him for perjury, charge him with perjury or making a false statement.
That's right.
So not only is your fifth intended to protect you for prosecution for the acts itself, it often comes up in situations where we are concerned for our clients about what's called a perjury trap.
Right. I mean, he's given thousands of statements over the last several years.
Absolutely.
And you're asking him to remember and testify, answer questions to things he said 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago. And by the way, he's currently 85 years old. So he was in his 70s when this all started. I mean, at 85, your memory starts to fade a little bit, and you're not thinking as clearly, possibly. But certainly he's still a very bright man. He's always been very high IQ and smart. But that's good lawyering. Saying, look, you might say something a little different today, and then the question is what you're saying today truthful, or is today the lie? But when you said it 4, 5, 6 years ago, that was the truth. It gets very,
Well,
very
he can't be
complicated.
prosecuted for what he said during the period of the um, pardon,
Correct.
but that could be used as evidence against him for something he said different now.
Right.
And that's the problem that he faces. But I'm going to step out on a limb here, which I rarely do, and give, we've been talking from a legal point of view. I'm going to give my own personal opinion about this.
Okay.
He has every right to invoke the Fifth.
Yeah.
It's good lawyering, as you said, to advise him to do so to protect him. There is definitely a genuine concern that the committee is out to get him, whether it's absolutely true or not. As a lawyer sitting there, that would be my frame of mind, and that would be the basis for my advice. Having said all that, he's not just a regular client. He's just not a regular witness in front of Congress. He was, as I said before, the most important person in America during the COVID crisis.
Yeah.
He gave thousands of public statements, testified, as I said, reportedly over 250 times before Congress, has been the person that millions, tens of millions, maybe more of Americans relied upon as the chief medical officer for the nation during this time, as the authoritative source on COVID. I think he has a moral duty under those circumstances to answer those questions and the results be damned. He can always protect himself if he's charged. And of course,
Yeah.
if in fact Congress makes determinations that he should be charged, or if they hold him in contempt, nobody in Congress has the power to prosecute him. It still relies on the Department of Justice.
Right.
Of course, the argument can be made that it's politicized now under Trump, and certainly Trump is no fan of Fauci. But be as it is, I believe, as a trial lawyer, I would rather be defending him in a trial with all of those arguments than not.
Right.
But I think he has a moral duty to answer those questions.
Well, I hear you, and I don't necessarily disagree. But if I were advising him along these lines, that you have a moral obligation, or if I were Fauci himself, I would say, well, I'll seriously consider answering all these questions, but I need more than this presidential pardon. Because the presidential pardon, although it's extremely broad, it's not unlimited protection. In other words, he could be prosecuted by a state. So I would say, well, I want to get every governor in the United States to pardon me as well. Or, there could be, I want to get a pardon going forward, that anything I say, going forward is also.
Well, that's not going to happen.
Right.
This administration. And let me be clear, when I say I believe he has a moral duty, that's because I'm sitting here in the confines of my home office, not representing Fauci. If I was representing Fauci, obviously I would not take that position, because my moral duty would be to represent.
Sure.
My professional duty represent his best interest. But I think, as a guy on the sidelines, I believe that given who he was and the responsibility he had, and also he gained enormous fame. Well, there's this side issue of whether or not his ego. Remember, the journal of his was released by the committee, and there are some excerpts in there that suggest that this was, part of his ego building or egomania, the way he was acting. But putting that all aside, I still think that he has an obligation. The transparency, we need to know what happened. I think we still need to know what happened. If for no other reason, to maybe protect ourselves from the future.
Yes, I agree. Now, if if I were Fauci, and I'm not obviously in his shoes, but what I would be thinking if I were in that position, I would think I hear my lawyer's advice. I know the world wants to know. I know there's a lot of pressure out there to tell the whole story. But at the end of the day, what I'm thinking about is saving my ass. I'm sorry to the rest of the world. I know you all want to hear this. You want the answers. But right now, I'm 85 years old, and I worked as hard as I could, 50 years committed to the public service, and I've done the best I could with the information. I always had good intentions, never intended to do anything wrong. But I know how things can go sideways real fast when it's a political witch hunt, and I'm not going to put myself in any risk of jeopardy of this thing coming back to haunt me with a criminal prosecution. And personally, selfishly, narcissistically, egocentrically, whatever you want to call it, I'm going to assert the Fifth Amendment and not answer anything because that's the best chance I have of never being criminally prosecuted.
And you're right. And as a lawyer, as an excellent lawyer that you are, that would be the advice you would give. That would be the advice I would give if I'm sitting next to him or advising him prior to the hearing. But actually, again, I have to say, I don't think, given who he was, who he is, I don't care if he's 85 or he's 101.
Yeah.
I don't care if he can run a marathon or he's on life support. I don't believe he has the right, morally, not legally, morally, to invoke the Fifth Amendment at this point in time.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people disagree with me. I think the selfishness of doing so, given the position he ascended to, the fame he got, and the enormous reliance that the American public on him, we all want to know what's going on. And if he was lying to us purposely during the time, if he knew something that he wasn't revealing, if he was withholding, I say if, I'm not saying that he did.
Yeah, we don't know.
If he was, then I think he has a duty to the American public to come clean now. Now, it may be that he is concerned that the committee is going to act unfairly. Let's be frank. I've represented a client or two in front of legislative committees. A lot of times it's a kangaroo court.
Yes.
It's not like a real court. There's no judge there. The rules of evidence don't strictly apply. They can throw your lawyer out if they want. And so at the end of the day, it's not a fair proceeding. And like we've talked about, a lot of the people asking questions have their own personal or political motivations in asking those questions. So it is a bit of a kangaroo court, and that is what fuels the decision making on the part of the lawyer and the part of the witness.
Yeah, so they were supposed to be investigating whether the U.S. government was funding directly or indirectly, the risky coronavirus research. Did the NIH award funding to EcoHealth Alliance, which was a U.S. organization collaborating with the researchers at Wuhan? There were some real legitimate issues that needed to be researched. You mentioned one earlier, gain of function. What knowledge was there, about that, and so forth. But but at the end of the day, if you listen to the questioning, I guess our question would be: was Rand Paul really going after those legitimate issues, or was he just going after building a criminal case against Fauci?
That's right, and that you make a very good point. I mean, it quite often these hearings, especially when they are televised, a lot of hearings take place behind closed doors. A lot of hearings, the congressional committees have hearings all the time, and they never come to light. They're not even on C-SPAN, most of them. But when you do it in front of the television cameras and the public audience, a lot of these professional candidates is what I call them, because that's what Congress is. They're professional candidates. They get elected, and the minute they get into their seat, they're already running for the next 2-year election
That's true.
if they're Congress, and it's just a few years later if they're senators. So the bottom line is, they have a personal interest in doing it. And this is my own personal bias. I mean, look, many of them are very good public servants, but a lot of them also love the limelight, and they like to make their point and like to be known,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a personal agenda. So, in a committee like this, with a topic so incendiary, it's obvious that you've got concerns as a client and as the lawyer. And so I think if it were a normal situation, we wouldn't even be having this discussion
Right.
for obvious reasons. But my opinion about it is based on who he was and the need for transparency. We need to know what the deal is. Now, if the congressional inquisition was done in a more professional, less biased manner, maybe he would be inclined to answer questions,
Well,
but it's never going to happen. That's for a fact.
right.
He's not going to change his mind.
Right. Well, we'll see when the ruling comes out tomorrow how that affects, and we can talk about what a contempt ruling really, how that would play out, what that really means. But, what I've heard about that hearing so far was that, when he refused to answer questions, it felt to me very much like Rand Paul was setting up a perjury trap, that he was trying to trap him into perjury. That was the focus. And so I think to myself, if I were wrong about that, if Rand Paul was really going after information that the Congress and the public and so forth, the world needs to know, then if he was really genuine about this and this testimony, these questions, why wouldn't he just give Fauci immunity for his testimony that day? He has a presidential pardon, which was, expired 18 months ago, or went through a period of time 18 months ago, right? He's now in front of this committee. Well, if you really want to get to the bottom of all these things, why not just say this committee is granting you a pardon or immunity, whatever that's, there's different types of pardons and immunity and so forth. We're giving you congressional immunity today for everything you say before this House committee. If he really was going after this, important information for medical research and the community, the world, then just give him the immunity and he'll answer all the questions,
Well, that's a very interesting point. First of all, let's be clear. It wasn't just Rand Paul who was asking questions.
True.
There were a number of other people asking questions. Yeah. And as to the issue of the immunity, the perjury trap, some of the questions I heard that were asked were very benign, non-substantive questions, like what color tie you have. Well, the idea was to get him to talk.
Right.
And, they're all using, a lot of these senators are attorneys themselves. And some are former prosecutors. I don't know if there are any former prosecutors on the committee, but on a lot of the committees there have been. And they're trying various tactics to try to get him to talk.
And that's what I was saying earlier, Mark, at the beginning of the episode when I said, there were so many questions asked and he pled the fifth, to everything. The optics aren't great. There were some questions maybe he should answer. What color's your tie? What color's your suit? Where'd you grow up? And so I think you're right about two things. One, you said earlier that then you kind of open the door to, well, you can't plead the fifth on these, but answer those. So that argument, which is a strong legal argument, we've seen it a lot of time in cases. It happens in trials and so forth. But the other thing that you were just saying too is they were trying to get him to talk, and that's an old trick. Like you said, these guys are lawyers. Most of them are, on this congressional committee. They're smart, trained lawyer advocates and so forth, and they've had so much experience in these hearings. It reminds me of when I look at criminal cases and you see a client or a suspect assert their Fifth Amendment, tell the officer, "I'm not talking." And next thing you know, the officer's like, "Okay, I totally respect that." And then they say to them, "Yeah, we won't talk about the case, but how about them Dolphins, by the way? Man, they're having a good season so far, aren't they? You're a Dolphin fan?" "Oh, yeah, I'm a Dolphin fan. I took my kids to the game." Boy, that quarterback, they just got him for a rookie. He's doing great. Do you follow the Marlins also? Now they're engaging in a conversation with a guy totally unrelated to the case. And next thing you know, and they're all trained to do this, next thing you know, the cop says, "You seem like such a cool guy. Just answer some of my questions." questions, and we can close this whole thing out, right? So that's
Yeah.
kind of what these guys are doing at a congressional level too, is let's just engage in conversation, and maybe he'll just smooth and just transition into, let's get to some substantive stuff now.
Yeah, but
It's a
this
trick.
isn't
It's a
a cop
trick.
with a untrained or
Right.
inexperienced
Yeah.
putative defendant
Right.
sitting
But
in an
yeah.
interrogation room.
Yep.
Fauci's been well prepared, and his
Yeah.
lawyer, who I don't know,
Well, he had a whole
but
team of lawyers. He had a whole team of
yeah,
lawyers. One got thrown
yeah,
out. You know that.
yeah, right,
One
right.
letter guy, and then,
But
but then Rand said on the record, and you and I as lawyers know why. Right after that lawyer left, he said, why, when he got thrown out. Let's be clear, he got thrown out. Rand went on the record and said, let it be clear on the record that Dr. Fauci has several other lawyers here present representing him, right?
right,
And he did that
yeah,
so it doesn't show that he's without counsel.
yeah.
Yeah.
And understand that these committees have their own counsel, whether or not the the individual senators are lawyers or have legal experience. Often these committees have their own counsel as well, who are sitting there and advising them. So,
Yeah.
but getting back to the issue of what may be motivating Fauci, I did read that apparently Rand Paul had made a public statement previously that Fauci belongs behind bars.
Right. Yeah.
That alone would be something that I would be arguing at a contempt hearing in front of a judge if he was being prosecuted for contempt. And I mean, while it's not a legal issue per se, it's an underpinning of the broader legal issue.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a fascinating area, and there's a lot of debate going both ways. We'll see what happens tomorrow morning.
What do you think if they declare that asserting the fifth was not valid, and they start talking about contempt and so forth, and then like you said earlier, if Department of Justice could get involved, whether they take the case or not. But so what really does happen if they rule that he does not have? I mean, can't they then turn it over to a judge to look at the questions and say, okay, what we call in camera, like in chambers, maybe get Fauci to answer in chambers just to the judge, and then the judge make a ruling of, okay, these you have a legal right to answer, constitutional right to assert your fifth, but these you don't. Like, where does it go if he's found in contempt?
Well, before we even get to that, let's talk about what the various issues are in play.
Okay.
Okay. So, for example, one is, does the pardon protect him? That's
right.
In other words, does the fact of the pardon mean that he must answer the question? In other words, putting it the other way, does the pardon protect them, meaning Congress, in that they can go ahead and hold him in contempt?
Mm-hmm.
Because now, I think most legal analysts would agree that no, even though he was given a pardon, he still has the right to answer the Fifth Amendment, to invoke the Fifth Amendment privilege, because there is the concern that they're trying to set him up for perjury.
Right.
And he can still be prosecuted for perjury or making a false statement under oath. So that issue is I think is pretty clear. The second issue is going to be whether or not, by making an opening statement, he waived his right to assert the privilege.
Right.
And there is some precedent, other cases where people have made opening statements before congressional committees, and they have in effect been deemed to have waived their Fifth Amendment privilege. So before they vote, I'm sure what's going on is internal discussions concerning how strong their argument and how strong their case would be for contempt. Because if it ever reaches a judge, the issue is going to be, well, whether or not a a judge is going to uphold the contempt, or the judge is going to find that he has a valid Fifth Amendment privilege. So what's the point of holding in contempt if they don't think that there's a good chance of proceeding, of winning,
Right.
right?
Right.
So that's those are two of the main issues, I think, that's going to be presented before these senators when they vote. Now, of course, ultimately, I think that their vote is going to be a political vote. All right.
Mhm.
Would you agree on that?
Yes, absolutely. I think the whole issue here is and we've talked in past episodes about politically motivated prosecutions, and on both sides of the aisle. Roger Stone, a Republican, was prosecuted. I mean, it can be either side of the aisle, and that was politically motivated. Yeah. So,
Well, what happened in the Roger Stone thing?
well, he's going to hopefully be a guest on it. I've been speaking with him recently, so I'm going to hold that for when he shows up. Okay. But he was doing some prison time, and then he got out when President Trump pardoned him.
Did he pardon him or commute the sentence?
I believe he got a full pardon, but I believe so, but we can confirm that. Yeah, he definitely, his sentence, I believe he was pardoned, and his sentence was ended with that, which seems like commuted. But I think he was pardoned. I mean, he's the
Okay.
closest. He's one of the closest figures to the president, in this second term of President Trump. So, but the it's just, we don't like politically motivated prosecutions. Of course, at the same time, when Fauci is asserting the fifth and not answering all these questions, well over 100 questions, as you said, it just deepens the public suspicion that he did something wrong. I mean, there was already a lot of distrust with this whole COVID, pandemic. For years, there's been a lot of distrust about how it was handled, and this just deepens it. But I want to caution our public and every listener here to realize that, the Fifth Amendment is a sacrosanct right that we all have. It truly is. It's one of our strongest, thresholds for our Constitution and our right as citizens of this country to be able to protect ourselves from self-incrimination. And so I want to caution people not to conclude that just because someone's asserting the fifth, that means they're guilty, or that asserting the fifth is proof of guilt or proof of wrongdoing or proof of committing a crime. It doesn't mean that whatsoever. It just means that they have a constitutional right and they're asserting it. So yes, it doesn't look good, it doesn't feel good, you want them to answer, and maybe it makes you more suspicious, but by him not answering that question does not mean Dr. Fauci committed any crimes in the past. He's just protecting his liberty, his freedom.
And it's important, that you mention this. I mean, look, let's be real. We have a Fifth Amendment privilege under the Constitution, but it's something that's sort of alien to the way we live our lives. When you're a child growing up and, your parent says, "Did you do that?"
Right.
I don't know any child who said, "Well, I'm going to take the fifth."
Yeah.
I mean, if they do, they're going to get slapped.
Yeah. Yeah.
At least
True.
back in my day.
Right.
So we are trained in our normal everyday life when we are accused of something to answer, to defend ourselves.
Right.
So because of that, I think there is this natural belief that when someone is invoking the fifth, even though, as you say, it's purely constitutional, legal right, absolute, one of the strongest rights we have still, to say, "I refuse to answer on the grounds that may tend to incriminate me," immediately the public opinion is that, you got something to hide.
Right.
And, a lot of times, when people are interrogated or asked questions by law enforcement, they say, "Well, I'm not going to answer that question," or I want my right to an attorney." A cop may say, or an agent may say, "Well, obviously it sounds like you got something to hide." And the thing I always tell people is, any potential client or existing client, is better to have someone believe you're guilty than have proof that you're guilty.
Right.
Can't be prosecuted on a belief that you're guilty. Can only be prosecuted on a proof. And if that proof comes from your own mouth, then you be damned.
Or yeah.
So keep quiet. Now, the optics are bad, and the optics in a situation like this are horrible for a guy who opened his mouth 10,000 times in front of the public and told people what he knew, what he believed, what they should do. And now all of a sudden he's saying, I'm protecting myself. Well, he's got the right to do that, but I don't like it. And I'm a lawyer who has advised clients to invoke the Fifth Amendment, more than there are grains of sand. But, hey, I personally don't like it. Now, I want to get back to something you asked before, which I think our viewers need to know. What happens in the event that the committee votes to hold him in contempt? My understanding is the committee itself then has to go, that contempt ruling by the committee or finding has to go before the full body of the Senate. And then if the Senate votes a resolution that he be held in contempt, then what happens is it's referred to the Justice Department. The Justice Department can decide to criminally prosecute him.
Right.
Or they can decline. At the same time, Congress can seek through a civil lawsuit against Mr. Fauci, Dr. Fauci, to have a judge rule. And if the judge then rules that he must answer the question and he refuses to do that, then at that point, then the judge can invoke sanctions. And one of the sanctions that the judge in a civil contempt can invoke is he could jail someone in order to force them to answer the question. You can't be punished for civil contempt, but it's remedial in nature, meaning the court wants the remedy of you following the court's order, and the court can order you to answer the question. And if you continue to refuse, the court can jail you.
That's right.
And the amount of time you could be held in jail, it's very interesting. There's no definitive. It's not like a sentence, a maximum sentence of X number of years. It's till one of two things happen. Either you change your mind and you come in and you answer the questions, or the court decides that there's no way by keeping you in jail you're going to ever answer the question. And at that point, the jailing of you becomes punishment rather than remedial, and the court has to let you out. I had a very important case involving that many, many years ago. Before I got involved, the person was represented by the public defender. My client had already been in prison for almost 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
It was crazy. So the bottom line is there are a lot of remedies here, but it would play out in the system. And no matter what happens, it'll be subject to appellate review.
Right.
So it could go on through it could even go to the Supreme Court, theoretically.
Right. We're not going to know the answer, the bottom line, for quite a while. But if as information comes out, rulings come out and so forth, we can always hop on and do a special episode and bring our listeners up to speed on where it's at in real time. But I think the big picture is that COVID was a really emotional, scary, challenging time for a lot of people, for everyone on all different levels, and now the people do want to know answers. They want the answers. They want to know how this happened. Maybe we could learn from it so it doesn't happen again in the future, especially if the pardon goes back 6 years before COVID even came to the United States. Maybe there were things that did go on during the 6 years, which is why he's getting the pardon, that maybe could have prevented it from happening. And the world wants to know the answers. So, and what was interesting to me when I kind of was preparing or thinking about this episode today is that I remember Fauci during a lot of those talks he gave, press conferences and so forth, that he was always emphasizing transparency. and giving as full all of the information that he had, he was sharing with the world. And so now you wonder, when he pleads the fifth, what's he hiding? That's what a lot of juries think when we have to deal with that as trial attorneys. We think if our client doesn't take the stand, or they're going to think, oh, what is that? Why are they avoiding taking the stand? What is it, that they're guilty of? They must be guilty, or else they would take the stand.
Yeah, and the judge, of course, always has to instruct the jury in a case where your client doesn't take the stand that he has an absolute right not to testify, and they absolutely can't hold that against him.
Right.
But like you say, despite all the judge's admonitions, their life experience is still going to take hold. Yeah. And I'm sure it's going to creep into their mind. And I bet you even in a jury room, and I wish I had sat on a jury, hopefully someday I will. Although who the hell would pick me?
Yeah, no one wants either of us on a jury. Yeah.
No one wants me on a jury. Yeah. But I'm sure somebody's going to say, he's guilty. He could have come forward and testified, and then someone else, but the judge tells you you're not supposed to consider that. Bullshit. That's what.
Right. And here, we're dealing with the same thing here, but like in a trial, we're trying to, if our client doesn't take the stand or during the investigation, the jury hears that they pled the fifth, we're trying to build our client's credibility during a trial. But then they question, well, geez, if they pled the fifth or they're not taking the stand, that really undermines their credibility. And that's
well, the jury can't know that your client took the fifth. That's an absolute no. The court will never allow that. But it's obvious when a trial goes on. Say everybody, naturally, human instinct, wants to hear from the horse's mouth. Wants to hear the defendant testify. I have to say something very interesting. We as trial lawyers have a tendency not to put our clients on the stand, especially if we've done a real good job ripping apart the government's case. Yep. The last thing we want to do is have our client snatch defeat from the jaws of victory by screwing it up. But I can say that more often than not, the cases that I've had jury verdicts of acquittal have been cases where my clients have testified. Yeah. And the testimony is never perfect. And they do take hits from the prosecutor. And there are some issues that come up that say, oh, geez, I wish he could have done a better job answering that. But at the end of the day, it created doubt in the jury's mind. So I'm always in favor, if my client will be a good witness, to have my client testify if I can. But I said the vast majority of times I don't, especially when my client tells me on day one, I'm going to be the greatest witness in the world. Right. When I hear that, I say, forget it, buddy. You're never taking that stand.
Yep, you're right. And when you say it creates doubt in the jury's mind, in this case of the Fauci, it creates doubt in the public's mind about Fauci, his credibility.
Right. The optics are horrible.
Yeah. So, I think it's a good conversation. We can continue it in future episodes, but we can kind of wrap this one up for today and bring them up, our listeners' updates in the future on it. I'm definitely going to be
Let's see what Congress does.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, Mark. So we'll sign off for today.
Until our next time, ladies and gentlemen, you are free to go.
Free to go. Your Free to Go is sponsored by Milburn Men's Clothing, where top athletes shop for sharp, tailored style. And whether Mark and I are in the studio or the courtroom, Milburn dresses us for success. Mention YFTG and get 10% off at Milburn Men's Clothing, which has been providing the finest in men's clothing and suits since 1946. Call 651-645-2922 or visit www.milburn.com. Everything expressed and discussed in this episode are the opinions and experiences of attorneys Guy Fronstin and Marc Nurik and their guests. All ethical rules are complied with. Attorney-client privilege and confidential information is not shared or released during these episodes, and names, dates, locations, and other identifying information may be changed to protect confidentiality. Topics are embellished, and none of the statements made constitute legal advice and should not be considered or relied on as such.